I just want to say welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. Good evening. I'm Deb Ruggiero, co-chair of the Jamestown Democratic Town Committee, with my friend Melody Durnack. She'll say a few words at the end, give you some activism work to do and a little bit of homework. But I appreciate you being here. This is the first of a number of community conversations that we're going to be hosting. So we look forward certainly to seeing you again and again. We are videotaping this, and that's important to know, because if anyone who wanted to be here could not attend, it will be available on our website, JamestownRIDemocrats.org. Okay? Again, that's JamestownRIDemocrats.org. And our goal with these community conversations is really to build relationships with the community, with people here who care deeply about policy issues that matter, whether they're local issues here in Jamestown, statewide, or in our country. Right now, it's a rather unprecedented time in our history, in our nation. And the last couple of months have been unsettling, chaotic, and dangerous. And this is why elections really, really matter. We do not have the presidency, we do not have a majority in the US Senate, and we do not have a majority in the House of Representatives. What we do have are the courts and Peter Nerohna. So his band of 22 AGs around the country are fighting to defend our democracy. So it's an honor to introduce to you our neighbor, our friend, and our rock star Attorney General here in Rhode Island, Jamestown's own Peter Nerohna.
Thanks, Deb.
I'm waiting.
I think this mic is roving, right? So I don't need to stay here. It's great. When I was a federal prosecutor, I used to have to stay with the podium. The judges would yell at you if you moved. But the judges aren't here. It's just me, so I'm going to move. It's great to see all of you, and it's great to be here at home. The good news is after this event, it won't take long for me to get home. So I thought what I would do, we can talk about the cases that we have brought as attorneys general, if you like, where they're filed, what they are about, what the prospects of success are. But I thought I would begin by talking about why we file those lawsuits, why we have been prepared to file them, why we have been able to move so quickly to get them filed, and why we have been, I believe, universally successful in those many lawsuits that we've been a part of. So we have, just to give you the overview, we have filed a birthright citizenship lawsuit. We have filed a lawsuit involving the funding freeze that many of you have heard about, both for state agencies and for nonprofit organizations. We have filed lawsuits about the NIH funding freeze that impacts much of the medical research in Rhode Island and beyond. We have filed lawsuits involving Elon Musk, what we call in our community Doge 1 and Doge 2, because of concerns about Mr. Musk and his troops accessing the personal data of Americans for reasons which we believe are outside. Regardless of what the reasons are, the fact that they're accessing it is outside the bounds of the Constitution. So we brought a number of lawsuits, and the reception from the courts has been very, very good. Why? Here's why I believe the reception from the courts has been very good. It's because we're right on the law. When I was an assistant United States attorney, there was a lawyer that worked with us. I was relatively young at the time. I'd moved back here with Shelley. His name was Jim Levy, and he told us what the federal judges expected from us when we walked into the courtroom as assistant United States attorneys was they wanted to be able to look to us for what we believed in good faith the law was. That we weren't there to advocate on behalf of a defendant or a personal client. We were there to advocate on behalf of the United States. And what they expected from us as assistant United States attorneys was to be right on the law and present the facts fairly. And I believe that that's what the federal courts are looking from us as attorneys general now. And that's why the reception has been so good. So why have we been able to take the action that we've been able to take so swiftly and so successfully? Well, first of all, in terms of the success, we have built together, myself and my 22 colleagues, including the District of Columbia, have built the best and biggest law firm in the United States. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that that is true. They are extraordinary lawyers. We have the benefit of having some big offices in our group, New York and California being the two largest, of course. But I will tell you that the lawyers that we have assigned to the case right here in Rhode Island, in federal court here in Rhode Island from my office, are excellent, excellent lawyers. They're arguing the case. Sarah Rice is arguing the case. She's from South Kingstown. She's doing an incredibly good job. Keith Hoffman is here from my staff, who sort of helps me interface with that group of incredibly talented lawyers. As attorneys general, until very recently, we were talking every day. We spoke every day from the inauguration all the way through, I guess it was today was the first day we went to our 3-day, a week model. The staff lawyers talk more than that. They talk every day, and then we talk as attorneys general together. When I was out in Los Angeles with my fellow Democratic attorneys general a few weeks ago, just the attorneys general got together in the room. Most of us were there in person, a few were there by Zoom. We talked about our litigation strategy, what cases we were going to bring, where we were going to file them. As you can imagine, with 23, Keith? 23. 23 type A personalities, those conversations can get fierce. Because there are some disagreements. I mean, Washington State, for whatever reason, has always had this go it alone approach. We saw another example of that, I think, in the next couple of days, rather than joining the team, although they've joined us on some other things. That's why we have 2 birthright citizenship cases. I mean, I don't think any of us, other than Washington State, would think that was ideal, but it's why we have 2 of those cases. But the staffs are extraordinary. So I came out of that room, and there were a bunch of people sort of outside the room that we were in as Justice Attorneys General, and I said at the time, I didn't know the Pope was sick at the time, but I said, it's white smoke. We finally have reached agreement on where we're going to do our next journey on this road. But when I went back to get my stuff, and this is the most important piece, when I went back to get my stuff out of the ballroom where we had been just before this, there were 18 to 20 lawyers sitting around a big round table with a computer right in the middle of it, and they were having a video conversation with their colleagues. Keith was one of those lawyers. Extraordinary lawyers doing this work that I think, I believe is more important than ever. All right, so why do it? Why bring the cases? What do the cases mean from where I sit? Well, I think the federal funding cases in particular, and the reaction to the federal funding cases, and I mean, when I say the funding cases, I'm talking about the NIH case, which is filed in Massachusetts, of which we are a part, but Massachusetts and a couple of other states are leading, and the case that we have in Rhode Island, which involves the broader Office of Management and Budget memo that paused all federal spending for a review. Those cases tell us, I think, what the president's ultimate motivations are. So if you think about those cases for a minute, when the president paused that funding, what he was doing was saying, look, Congress has allocated this money to the various states, state agencies in some instances. So money for healthcare, money for education, money for veterans, money for law enforcement. So I'll give you an example about law enforcement. The high intensity drug task forces that are in every state in the country, including here, run here by the state police. Their funding was frozen, okay? They do the state's significant drug trafficking investigations. So that money was frozen for law enforcement. So things that are in the heartland of what matters to us as Americans and as Rhode Islanders. froze money in many other areas as well, but that's what that case was about, the case we have here. The case in Massachusetts was about changing the reimbursement rate from 55%, round numbers, to 15% on the overhead for medical and other kinds of research, which changes the dynamics within which places like Brown and URI and others that are getting research grants from the National Institutes of Health to do the kind of medical and other research, scientific research, which makes all of our lives better. So the president, by pausing that funding, was saying to the Congress, it doesn't matter to me what the Congress has already allocated to the states. Okay, it doesn't matter to me what the Congress has allocated to the states. And remember, we have a compact with our federal government where we pay our federal taxes. They go down to Washington. Some of that money is used to run the government, and some of it comes back to us in the forms that we're talking about. Some are direct appropriations, some are formula grants. There are all sorts of very complicated ways that this money comes back to Rhode Island, but it comes back to us because at the end of the day, it is our tax money, if you will, that's coming back to us to do the kinds of things that only the federal government can do or can finance, okay? So by pausing the money in this way, the president is effectively sidelining the Congress. Now, I'm not talking about money that will come in the future. That is a whole separate question that perhaps we'll get a chance to spend some time on. But we're talking about money already allocated by the Congress. Now, that violates the Constitution and the laws of this country in a whole variety of ways. All of us growing up, or most of us, is my history teacher here? We learned about in school, for Mrs. Salmons, I guess it would have been in 5th grade anyway, right, Jane? We learned that the Congress has the power of the purse, right? That is, I mean, if you're a young person and you're learning about what the Congress does, they pass the laws, but their real power, the power that they wield over policy, is the power of the purse. If they don't fund it, it doesn't happen. And we hear a lot, I hear a lot from my friends on the other side of the aisle about the will or the intent of the framers. I see David in the back. David's a lawyer, an accomplished lawyer. We hear an awful lot from the Supreme Court about originalism in the Constitution, that the Constitution is not a living document. I don't agree with that viewpoint, but the argument for those who present that viewpoint is that that was the will of the framers. Well, here was the will of the framers. If we go back and read, among other things, the Federalist Papers, it was that we have a tension among our branches of government. And that tension is what ensures our democracy. Okay? So there's a judicial branch, there's the legislative branch, which is our Congress federally, and then there is the executive power, which is vested in the president. And it is the tension between those three branches of government, none of which have the exclusive power, which protects our freedoms. Because when anyone goes too far, the other branches of government are viewed as a brake, or are a brake, on extremism from another branch. And the judicial branch, if you think about it, as Judge McConnell said at the hearing on our preliminary injunction a few weeks ago, but he said, I don't have an army outside to enforce my decisions. I only have the power of contempt, okay? And it is true that when we start ignoring the will of the courts, eventually culminating in the Supreme Court, then the judiciary loses its authority and its power. Because its power is in the power that it has taken upon itself in Marbury versus Madison, which somebody told me the other day was in 1803. I would have pegged it a little bit later, but either way, old case. Justice John Marshall said the law is what I say, we say as the Supreme Court in the end says it is. Oh, there you are. Why aren't you giving this lecture? Ms. McGurl. Well, you'll interrupt if I say anything wrong, okay? All right, so the bottom line is our judicial branch has the power that it has taken for itself. And so it is only as long as we respect that power that there really is power there, right? It is the most tenuous power, if you will. It's only the power that We have given it since 1803 when Justice John Marshall in Marbury versus Madison said that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of what the law is. So what the president has done in the context of the OMB case is take upon himself the spending power of the Congress, because he said, listen, I don't care what the Congress said. I don't care if I've obligated this money to the states. I don't care if the states are counting on it. Right? We're not talking about future money. We're talking about money that people are expecting to draw down, like on the night of the infamous memo from OMB, Medicaid funds. Now you'll hear that this was never going to apply to Medicaid, okay? On the night of the OMB memo, our Medicaid office in Rhode Island, this is in a filing from Jonathan Welmer from the Department of Administration, we tried to pull down Medicaid funding and we were not able to do so, okay? And the federal contact people, whoever they reached out to, told them that our folks here in Rhode Island, that there was a pause, it applied to Medicaid, they didn't know how long the pause would last, and they weren't willing to put anything in writing. Okay, now I was a federal prosecutor for a long time. When someone won't put something in writing, they probably know that what they're doing is unlawful, and that was plainly unlawful. So what the president has effectively done, as I said, is steal Congress's most significant power. He's taken it upon himself, okay, taken it to himself. And what is remarkable is the silence among some members of Congress having lost that authority. Right. Like, I don't know why anybody would want to live in Washington, frankly, and I apologize to any Washingtonians here. Philadelphia's pretty tough too, David, actually. It's a little hot in the summer. It's good to see you up our way. But why go to Washington and serve in the Senate or the Congress if your powers are being taken from you? I don't understand the lack of outcry. Senator Hawley, with whom I probably agree on nothing, was vocal there for a little bit, and I haven't heard much from him since. But it's time for all members of Congress on both sides of the aisle to stand up and say, this is our power. So the president has sidelined, by taking the power of the purse, the Congress, okay? And look, Judge McConnell says that very clearly in his decision, that the power of federal spending does not lie in the president's priorities, but it lies in the priorities of the legislature, the Congress, because that is the will of the American people when it comes to spending. The will is not expressed through the president. It is expressed through the Congress, okay? So we have Congress sidelined, and that's frankly how I've described it when I've been asked about what I see in what the president is doing in that particular case. Now, we did quite well in front of Judge McConnell. We got a temporary restraining order, and we got, I think, a really well-reasoned decision, parts of which I just paraphrased back to you. So what happened in the wake of that well-reasoned decision by Judge McConnell? What happened? All of a sudden, Judge McConnell's authority is being undermined as an activist judge, and worse, okay, by the vice president, by Mr. Musk. And frankly, I don't recall if it was by President Trump himself or not, but it doesn't matter. You know, whether it be on certain television stations that are sort of, you know, playing this narrative that Judge McConnell is making decisions based on something other than what he means, what he believes the law is, it's undermining our judiciary branch. And so what happens in a democracy when the legislature is sidelined and the judiciary is undermined? Well, two of those branches of government effectively don't exist anymore. And I believe that the President Trump, has authoritarian instincts, and that...
You think? You think, Peter?
Trying to be fair. And that these acts are effectively driven by an instinct of authoritarianism. So take, for example, the spending. If the president didn't like the means by which the monies are being spent by the Congress, there's a procedure by which he could go back and change it. He could go seek a rescission of those funds. Now remember, he controls both houses of Congress. It's entirely possible that the Congress would give him the rescission he's looking for. But he doesn't care enough about the Congress to go through what the law requires. It's simply stop. It's simply stop. It's just patently unlawful and unconstitutional. So the biggest and best law firm in the country, which is our collection of attorneys general's offices, are winning these fights because we are fundamentally right on the law. And I will tell you, looking at watching the Department of Justice lawyers, as I did, as they opposed our preliminary injunction, I'm not going to say I feel for them because it's the assignment that they've taken. And these are not career lawyers that are doing it. It is people that the administration has brought in. But they really don't have strong legal arguments at all. Now, I can't predict what the Supreme Court will do, but I'm really confident that the First Circuit is going to uphold Judge McConnell. All right, so that's what I think the president is doing. We've brought these cases because we believe we're right on the law. We've been prepared for this moment. We started preparing, I would say, sometime last summer at a meeting among the attorneys general when we were concerned with the direction the election was going. So we wanted to be prepared in the moment because we knew that President Trump, if he were to be reelected, or elected a second time more accurately, we would not have the ramping up time that we had in the first administration. And so we had to be ready to go. And so the teams have worked very, very hard. So for those of you who are, and that may not be everybody, I suspect it probably isn't, who is concerned about what the president is doing, and I said this to a group of leaders in Providence today, you should take some level of solace from the fact that this is a time for attorneys general. We are prepared for this moment. We have warmed to the fight. Our staffs are incredibly strong. We are not shocked and we are not awed by the president's acts. We are going to fight everywhere we can, not because we're fighting with the president. While I think his performance with President Zelensky was bizarre and awful, we are not going to take him on when it comes to foreign policy. That is not, we don't have the legal ability to do that, right, Keith, or do we? I suspect not. I don't know, they're creative over there. But what we really care about is that the law be followed, that this push and pull among the three basic components of our democracy continue to function. And you can look very narrowly at the cases and think it's just a matter of kind of a cultural war thing. That's not what it's about. It's about what the law requires. And as I said, I've talked a little bit about it's when I see what's happening, I worry about losing our democracy to authoritarianism. And it doesn't, if you study history, right, it doesn't happen overnight, right? People who become authoritarians are often elected in some form, whether it be Joseph Stalin or other authoritarian leaders in our history. I'm listening to a book on Stalin. Don't ask me why. My staff makes fun of me because I don't know if it puts them to sleep or just worries about my mental health. But it does help me try to put into context this moment. And it's a time for Americans to stand up and remind the president what we believe in as Americans, what we fought for. My father went to Korea during the war. What people like my father and other people, veterans, is Dennis in here? Dennis Webster. Mm-hmm. Dennis is in here. Bill Paiva is a veteran. What our veterans fought for over the centuries is our democracy built on what the framers intended 250 years ago. It's a system that has, for the most part, worked. It's not a perfect union, but it has, for the most part, worked. And that is what we, as attorneys general, are defending. And here's the other thing, and this is only going to play itself out in, I think, sort of interesting ways. There's a lot of interesting nuances here. But on the birthright citizenship cases, we sought, and Keith will correct me if I'm wrong, a nationwide injunction because we believed that whether the red states or I mean, they were all red states, but non-red states, whether they were involved in our cases or not, and they weren't, they haven't joined any of our cases, that a child born in the United States is a citizen no matter whether they were born in a red state like Utah or a blue state like Arizona. And so there we sought a nationwide injunction and got them, I think, in both cases, right? Washington State and in Boston. In other ones, we have sought only an injunction that would apply to our states. So, for example, in the NIH funding, it's only for the states that brought suit, right? What about our OMB case, Keith? Is that?
Just the states that brought suit.
Right. So if you think about that for a minute, red states stand a lot to lose by not being part of these cases, right? So the money will flow to blue states and is flowing to blue states, and it's not flowing to red states because they haven't been in these cases. The federal workers case that may be filed, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but the fired federal workers cases, Maryland and DC may bring a case like that in theory, and we may join them in that case. But if Virginia doesn't join them in that case, which is likely, then federal workers who happen to live in Maryland or the district would be covered, and not so much in Virginia. And so without giving away a lot of our strategy, red states have to feel it. They have, soybean farmers in Kansas are feeling the cutoff of foreign aid because they grow the soy that becomes part of the product that Salem produces in Quonset. Okay, and so my U.S. Attorney colleague, former U.S. Attorney colleague, Barry Grissom in Kansas, when we were on an all Obama administration U.S. Attorney call, sort of an alumni association we have, we're all getting older. You look on that Zoom and you realize, why do all they do? They all look a lot older. Do I look older to them? And I imagine I do. But what Barry will tell you is that he's hearing from soy farmers in Kansas that don't like the president's policies either. And so part of this is to ratchet up pressure on red states to speak out, because only when those red states speak out, when they're not getting the NIH funding, when their monies aren't flowing, that the president perhaps will feel some pressure to follow the Constitution and give Congress the power of the purse back. Now, what are the fights ahead? I'm going to stop in 5 minutes so that you can ask me questions, and maybe even sooner than that. What are the fights ahead? I think the fights ahead, we've been talking about existing, already obligated funding. So grants have been applied for, and you've received your notice of award, for example. Appropriations that the state expects to get for highway building and the like. The next round will be future funding that is conditioned on the state or non-state agencies, entities, following, and of course that battle is already playing out in some ways, with diversity, equity, inclusion, for example. And so there are a lot of nonprofits that are scrubbing their websites to comply with this federal directive for fear of federal funding. Our ability to represent these nonprofits is somewhat tenuous when we are in litigation with the federal government, unlike in the ordinary circumstance when we're suing a private entity on behalf of all Rhode Islanders. But I see that coming. It's already here and it's going to continue to escalate. So, for example, law enforcement funding, which the state can access only if the state actively participates in immigration work. And I will tell you that I've prosecuted a lot of serious criminals who have been in the country here unlawfully, mostly who have been deported the first time and have come back and committed a second crime. It's part of what we did when I was U.S. Attorney. I had no problem doing those cases, okay? But I will tell you that as a state prosecutor now, when we have 14,000 pending felony cases, and I have 6 or 7 investigators, including Bill Paiva, the last thing I need Bill Paiva doing, and members of the state police doing, or the Providence police doing, is going out and targeting nonviolent offenders, whether they're here in the country legally or not. I mean, if you're committing a serious crime, we're already doing it, okay? But if, on the other hand, you're not committing serious crime, then that is something that ICE is well prepared to do. And I don't think that, for example, 25% of the state police troopers, as happening with FBI agents now, need to be detailed to immigration enforcement in Rhode Island. As somebody who prosecuted immigration crimes here, that is a tremendous waste of resources in Rhode Island. Tremendous waste of resources. I mean, ICE didn't have enough cases to do when I was U.S. Attorney, frankly. Why they need 25% of the FBI resources and the DEA resources and the Secret Service resources to focus on immigration. I mean, you ask, I was asking, who was in my office in the last, it was members of the statewide FOP, members of the statewide IBPO, International Brotherhood of Police Officers, Fraternal Order of Police, Providence Fraternal Order of Police. Trust me, law enforcement guys, okay, all three of them. Don't love my views on firearms. Let's not discuss that tonight. There's plenty of controversy here already. So they're not, sort of aligned with me on a lot of what I view, a lot of my viewpoints, but they're on the street. And I asked them, is ICE going door to door, house to house in Rhode Island? And the answer to that is no. Like a lot of times people think it's ICE when it's really the Pawtucket Police Department. I don't, just as a practical matter, I don't think it's constitutional. I think that's a fight that's coming. I also think it doesn't make a lot of law enforcement sense. But whether it's about immigration or all sorts of other things, diversity, equity, and inclusion, those efforts to strong arm the states, those fights are coming. We're right on the law there too, under the 10th Amendment and other theories. So I think those are going to be difficult issues, but you can already see the fallout for non-governmental agencies. They are caught between losing necessary funding to serve Rhode Islanders and conforming with these directives. And I know that some of them already are feeling this pressure and frankly have accommodated it. So I think that is everything that I wanted to share. The work, I will tell you that the work has really energized me, frankly. I'm in my 7th year as Attorney General, and I've loved the work, but if you can't get the place kind of going the way you want it by your 7th year, you probably shouldn't have taken the job or asked for it in the first place. So as you sort of see the end coming without Donald Trump, I would have felt on most days probably somewhat irrelevant because the ship is really operating on all cylinders. But the president's election and the need to push back has really energized me, energized the staff, and I guess this is the last thing I'll say, and it's an unintended but really good consequence of the office we've built. Many of you have heard me speak before about what I wanted to do with the AG's office, and that was to turn us from, in the civil division, from just a defend the state when the state gets sued shop to a proactive, we're willing to get out there and fight on offense on behalf of Rhode Islanders in healthcare, energy, the environment, consumer protection, civil rights, and more. Well, we've been able to recruit that staff. Keith is one of them, and Sarah Rice is another of them. Kate Sabatini is another one. So we've been able to build this really group of really strong lawyers in that space that they're also, as you might expect from what I just said, well positioned to do this work because they're the very kinds of lawyers that are spend their time when Donald Trump wasn't president getting out on offense for the people of the state. So those skills transfer very, very well. So I'm glad I didn't, I always think best case, so I didn't build that part of the office with my colleagues in the office in anticipation of a second Trump term, but the fact that they're there makes me sleep much better at night because they really are extraordinary. I'll leave you with this. The night that OMB memo came out, I think all of us saw it sometime in the evening in the office. And I don't remember whether they shared it with me or I saw it on my Blue Sky account or whatever it was. But we all knew there was something about this which was overreach. And I would say we had an internal phone call first about whether we wanted to participate in the lawsuit, whether we were willing to bring it in Rhode Island and take on the responsibility that meant. The court's going to be looking to a Rhode Island Assistant Attorney General to argue it. And after that phone call, there was a staff phone call from the other states, already knew each other. It wasn't like we had to build it. It was already built. And everyone agreed we were going to go. We were going to go in Rhode Island. Well, we hadn't agreed on Rhode Island just yet, right? We hadn't, because that came the next day. But Rhode Island was on the table with a couple of other places. And then having California on the team, there were 6 states that led, ourselves, New Jersey, New York, California, who else, Keith? Was Illinois and Massachusetts, right? So, little state and kind of playing with some of the bigger ones there. But having California on the team on the West Coast bought us some time, so some of our folks were able to get a little sleep overnight while California kind of picked up the ball, the drafting ball. And I will tell you, the product that we filed the next afternoon, and there was some debate as to whether to file it in New York, Washington, or Rhode Island. I felt it was really important to file it someplace other than Washington, because I didn't want it to be a Washington case. I wanted it to be a case that impacted everyday Americans, including everyday Rhode Islanders, because it does, and it will. We were able to file that lawsuit. What did we file it, Keith? I know we kept kind of waiting, 4 or 5 o'clock. I mean,
yeah,
but
19 hours after we.
yeah. So and the work was extraordinary, and so to me that gives me, and it should give you, if you see the world the way I do, that should give you some comfort that there is a team that is there to fight for you if you believe in the same values that I believe in and the team believes in. And this is the Attorney General's time. This is our time. This is what we were built for. And so we're ready. We're lawyers, we're fighters, we like being in a courtroom, we're not afraid of that context, we're right on the law, we're not afraid of the president, and it's why you see some of the fighters you see there in the governor's office, whether it be Janet Mills, former AG in Maine, you see Josh Shapiro, former AG in Pennsylvania, you see Maura Healey, former AG in Massachusetts, you see Josh Stein, former AG in North Carolina. Fighters. And we are ready to go. And I'm really proud of the work. So I'll stop there, and then we can take questions if you have any.
Yes, I told you.
Thank you.
I told you we had the courts and Peter Nerohna. I meant it.
Team.
It's a team sport. So if you would just, this is a microphone because we are recording this, as I mentioned. So if you could just state your name and your question.
Okay. Christine Ariel, thank you so much
Hi,
for coming
Christine.
tonight.
Sure.
Questions about 2 cases that the state of Rhode Island may have already gotten into or not.
Yeah.
The Treasury in the Southern District
Yep,
of New
Doge
York.
1, as we
Doge
call it.
1.
Yep.
I'm very concerned about disclosure of financial and personal data to Doge.
Yes.
And second is the Consumer Financial
Yep.
Protection
CPFB.
Bureau.
Yep.
Chances of success, how good is the law on
Yeah.
our side on both of
Yeah.
those?
So not as strong as where we are now, but still, I think, pretty strong. So let's take Doge 1, which is really a matter of accessing Treasury information, that part of the Treasury Department that distributes money. Keith, and you're going to, please, that's why I brought you, so don't be afraid to jump in. The issue there, as we saw it, was you have a person who has been appointed to this very undefined role, having never been confirmed by the Senate, as most all cabinet offices are, accessing the public's most sensitive data with a team of people who have never gone through the federal background checks that every single federal employee has to go through, okay? So in the near term, in New York, we had, I think, I know we had good success on that narrow issue. Going forward, again, the president controls the Congress. Could he establish a department of Doge? I mean, I know something like it existed in the White House before, and then get Senate confirmation for somebody like Musk or Musk himself, and with employees who get those background checks, including him, have access to the same data? The answer to that is yes. But the issue there is that the president did not go about it the right way. And Keith, what's the status of that case?
Preliminary injunction granted, and for the court to reconsider one aspect of the preliminary injunction that was granted to hopefully expand it slightly more.
Yeah, so what Keith said was that the preliminary injunction was granted, and we're trying to go back to sort of expand it a little bit more. We had less success on Doge 2, which was a broader case brought by my colleagues that we did join in Washington, brought by the attorneys general of leaders in that case. So we have leaders, and then we have the rest of us that will join in and support. So that was Minnesota and Arizona and New Mexico. And they were hearing what we were hearing. There was a lot of concern from their constituents about Musk and Doge generally. So that's a broader lawsuit. Always, I think, a little bit of a bigger lift. That is the only case that we've brought where the judge in the first instance did not grant our TRO. But the judge in her decision did express deep concern in the way that Musk and the president were going about what they were doing. And so I think that in that case, my sense is that at the end of the road, we will succeed there too, but we did not get the kind of injunctive relief we were looking for in the first instance.
So both of those on the merits are looking good?
So my long, you want a shorter answer. Both of them on the merits are harder cases, but they're going pretty well, and I think the odds of at least short-term success are high, right? There are ways around it. I mean, the president did some things that are plainly unlawful and will always be unlawful. And no matter how you do it, will be unlawful. This is something where his approach, his process was faulty. Arguably, he could fix the process. Whether he's willing to do it, who knows? Whether he has the ability, as a matter of talent to do it, who knows? But that's where those cases stand right now.
Another question? Yes.
Okay. Oh yeah, CPFB. Yeah, so we're an amicus in that case. And that's really a question of whether or not, the president can effectively eliminate a congressionally established agency without ever going back to the Congress. And I believe that is a case that we should win, because again, it's an instance of sidelining the Congress. And Keith, why aren't the states directly involved in that? Do you recall? I don't want to put you on the spot. Well, I am.
So we may at some point be involved in a case like that.
Okay. So there you go. Right now, an amicus in that case, which means we're filing a friend of the court brief. All right.
Here?
Right here.
Hi.
Hi.
Chris. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Excellent.
So my question to you is about some executive orders and stand-down non-enforcement orders that are pro-corruption and directly violate federal statutes. So the president, with his pro-corruption agenda, has said there's going to be no enforcement of the FCPA.
Yeah, the federal
There'll be
foreign-
no enforcement of
Foreign
money
Corrupt Practices Act.
anti-money laundering, and that he instructed the intelligence agencies not to go after any kind of Russian cyber interference in America. Is there something that the states can do? Because the executive orders, for instance, they're not laws, they are under
Right.
the, Article 2.
Right.
And they're supposed to only apply to facilitating laws that are, on the books.
Yeah.
So if you've got federal statutes
Right.
and he's saying don't obey them, we're not going to obey them, and
Or
we're not
don't
going to
enforce them.
We're not going to enforce
Right.
them. What can we do at the state level?
Well, that's a difficult question, and I don't have an immediate answer. I don't think we've really taken that up yet, Keith. My initial reaction is, and we'll take it back, and as we say, workshop it a little bit. But I view that, I know you're a veteran of the Justice Department like I am, to the extent that involves a decision to spend your prosecutorial resources elsewhere, I'm not sure whether we can do anything. We try to be cognizant of where we can impact, our residents, and where the law, we believe, is pretty clear that we have we have standing and we have a lane. We're always asking ourselves in the first interest, as I know you understand, whether we have standing. And sometimes there's some instances where it's not really clear, and that's been some of our more, I think, vigorous debates, is some folks believe we have standing and other people aren't so sure. And then what's our degree of risk taking? And I think that is something that I do think varies among the attorneys general. I don't mind risk taking. I mean, I've tried a lot of cases. I've lost some. I've won others. But there are some attorneys general that really come out of, I'm more of a trial lawyer, that come out of more of an appellate background, that are more cautious. And I know you know the different, it's just a different kind of beast. Yeah, and so, we have a lot of discussion around that. I think the hardest thing for me is everything's happening so fast. I rely on the staff much more than I would in the typical Rhode Island-based case. In part because we have to establish consensus among the offices. And so what I'm really looking for when they come to me is, how confident are we on the law? Is it something that impacts Rhode Islanders in a negative way? Do we have standing? And then what's our role going to be? Do we have the ability with our 30-person civil division to do this case, not ourselves, but be as part of a lead, or are we going to be in a support role? But that's sort of the things that go through. That's kind of how I'm spending a lot of my time these days is dealing with those questions.
But if a bigger office, bigger state, took the labor and already doing it.
Of course, yeah.
question?
And there are a lot of cases like that. Look, for example, just so you understand some of the decision making, the National Institutes of Health case is a funding case, right? That could have probably been folded into our Rhode Island case. There were, Boston, however, has a ton of medical research up there, so they were really hot to bring the case there. So, this is part of, a 23 AG collaboration, but at the same, and it's why we have two birthright citizenship cases. Glad they're both going well. But, sometimes you have to make these adjustments for the betterment of the group.
Another question? Anybody in this area since I'm here?
Hi, Peter. Thank you so much.
Sure, good to see you.
Good to see you, too. Thank you, thank your office, thank your extraordinary group. I feel buoyed listening to you talk.
Glad.
It's wonderful, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but
That's okay.
can you help me understand, and maybe others, the value of the cases even if he gets convicted, because he is a convicted felon.
Right,
And we know him to be the Teflon guy.
sure.
So I don't understand how, if these cases are successful, how is it going to help in the long run?
Yeah, so
it's scary to me.
Right, so these aren't criminal cases, and we recognize that, and this, depends on how. As a prosecutor, this is not criminal misconduct. What it is, though, is civil violations of our Constitution and other federal law. Okay, and so what we've asked the court to do is to stop the president from doing it, okay? And that's why I spoke earlier, probably at length, maybe longer than I should have, about Marbury versus Madison, because the judicial power is only as good as we respect it. And when the vice president and Mr. Musk undermine it, and Americans believe from our leaders that it's okay to, without any basis, undermine the integrity of a judge who's been serving for at least 20 years. I can tell you, I was a prosecutor. I appeared in front of him. I mean, Judge McConnell was squared away judge, and didn't always rule for the government, which I represented at the time, federal government, and those prosecutions I had in front of him, called balls and strikes. And if you listen to the arguments on the preliminary injunction, pretty, impressive as always. And so I guess what I would say is, what we're doing is asking the courts to stop this overreach in violation of the civil law and the Constitution. So taking power from the Congress, for example, that he has no right to do. Or, in other instances, requiring the states in violation of the 10th Amendment to do the federal government's bidding. That's not how our republic was designed, right? McGirl, all powers not given to the federal government reside in the states. The Supremacy Clause doesn't mean you have to do what they tell you to do. That's not what it means. It means when there's a conflict between federal law and state law, federal law trumps. But that doesn't mean, no pun intended, but that doesn't mean that the federal government can direct states to carry out federal policy. No, we have our own policies. Again, there's ironies of history here, right, around states' rights. There are some really, you know, if you listen to Ms. McGurl, as I did through my children, there are a lot of ironies here. But that's what the fight's about. It's about using our court system to stop or slow down the president's overreach. And we have, I don't know, I think we've brought among us 10, 12 cases. And with the exception of that failure of the judge in Doge 2 to issue the TRO we requested, we have won every one of those cases to date. And I'm confident that until we get to the Supreme Court, which is a bit of a wild card, we'll see what happens. I will say the court itself, though, this is a John Marshall moment for Justice Roberts, right? Or somebody on that court, to remind the president that his branch of government, has the full legitimacy and power of all the other branches of government, even though they don't have an army standing outside. If he doesn't do that, then they become just a rump court, which really has no value at all.
Someone else? Anybody else? Let me get this gentleman first. Oh, hello, excuse me. Thank you.
Ken Froberg.
I can.
I got a question for you. A few years ago, I started doing a genealogy, and to find out that on my wife's side, she was related to an individual who is called the father of the Bill of Rights, George Mason. And then the reason he didn't sign the Declaration of Independence, even though he was invited to do it, simply because the reasons you just stipulated, the individual for the individual and the states themselves. This brings me back to what I wanted to ask you about. Is there was a act that was just recently passed, the SAVE Act. Are you familiar with that? It's the act where it's also the Project 2025.
I'm familiar with that.
Okay. Well, you would be if the thing is that it's the individuals that who cannot get, for example, a simple real ID. And I was wondering how many ladies in this room tonight had problems getting a real ID.
Oh, because of the maiden name.
Well, your birth certificate is null and void.
Whatever.
You're not
That's
who
probably
you
not
are.
a phrase we use anymore.
Right.
What's
And
the
that's
right term? Surname? Thank you. Birth name. Thanks.
Right. You have no birth name.
I'm
anyway.
too old.
But the thing is that I was just questioning on that. It was passed by the House, number 22, and then through the Senate, 128. The Republicans, of course. And then my question being is, will they be overridden? How can we get this individually back to the ladies, for example? I mean, I have ladies coming to me this past weekend saying, I can't do anything because now they're trying to null one vote for the family. I mean, it doesn't seem right. One vote, I mean, they're trying to liquidate the voting
We'll look
system.
into it and I'll get back to you because I don't have an answer for you as I stand here. Unless you do, Keith.
We signed a letter opposing SAVE Act.
Okay, well, there you go. That's what we did.
Thank
Shows you how much control I have over what we're doing.
Hi, my
Hi,
name's
Ann.
Ann.
I know who
Armstrong.
you are.
Yeah.
Hi,
So
Ann.
my question is, if Trump does what people say that he's prone to do, and say he grabbed somebody in his office by the hoo-hoo, for example, or verbally assaulted them till they got sick and went in the hospital and had a stroke,
Yeah.
do you think he should have immunity because he's the president?
Well, and I haven't really. I don't want to deal in hypotheticals tonight. I think the Supreme Court, by giving the president the kind of immunity they've given him, is not something I would have done. But look, I'm a former prosecutor. I'll just be upfront with you. I think the power of the pardon, for example, is way overused. A lot of lawyers and agents worked hard on cases, and whether it's President Biden's pardons or President Trump's pardons, I think those were unwise. All right.
Question?
Who's next?
Peter, first, thanks very much for all you're doing, you
Sure.
and your team.
A great team.
The worry that I have is about the elections in 2026. And what can we do, other than fight like hell, but what can we do in order to respond to that threat? Because I feel very threatened.
So about the, excuse me, the validity of our elections, or just the outcome of the elections? Yes.
on the other side are very organized.
Yes. Well, there are two questions. So if you're asking me, first of all, you asked this question last night, Chris. I didn't have a better answer, frankly, than the speaker did, honestly. I don't think there's anything that the state government can do to ensure, to push back against disinformation organized by people inside the United States or otherwise. We just don't have that capability, even in our state police. We just don't have it. We do in the federal government, but obviously under this administration, the Justice Department is not the independent entity that it was when I was there. And I served Republican and Democratic presidents in the Justice Department. And you did too, right, Chris, I assume? Yeah, so that I think is not a question that we can solve for, except we can solve for every vote in Rhode Island being counted the right way. I don't think, Heath, you've done our election work. I don't think our voting system is connected to the internet. Is it, or do we how do we transmit the voting results?
Oh, that's a good question. There is.
Hi, Dawn. Senator.
Do you know the answer? I do know the answer, yeah.
Oh, good. You pop. Right. Good.
Like, I know that one. I'll be able.
Like, kind of, right?
Yeah. So the results from the polling locations will be transmitted, but they are they're kept on basically like a USB drive, and that's the official count.
Right, and that's physically brought to the Board of Elections. Right.
And we also have the physical paper ballots.
That's
and
a
then the
backup.
audits that we do after.
That's good. So maybe that'll give you some comfort. Now on the political side, truthfully, if you want the Democrats to retake one or both houses of Congress, because that's the only thing that'll be on the plate in that year, then we have to target which districts can be flipped, and then get out there and, as the speaker said last night when I was with him, get out there and support those candidates. I also think, I think frankly, we need to show leadership here in the state of Rhode Island. It's not like we're not going to have to push back after 2026. We're going to have to push back. And so there are going to be questions right here in Rhode Island as to who our next, for example, governor is, and whether that person is prepared to push back against the administration's overreach. And I don't believe that Donald Trump, frankly, what did Margaret Thatcher say about Mikhail Gorbachev? He was a man we could do business with, right, Ms. McGurl? This is not a guy, I think, unless something were to dramatically change, where we could do business with him. I think we have to get him to the point where he is, that his ability to do damage because we take one house of Congress or both is moderated, and then ultimately have to make sure that he goes in
Peter, one more question?
2028.
One more?
One more question? Terrific.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Olivia Nagel. I live in Newport.
Hi, Olivia.
It's
Welcome.
important enough to come over the bridge.
Yes, yes.
Thank
Brave.
you for your talk to us tonight.
Sure.
I have some pretty deep concerns based on historical experience of the World War II period, of the 30s, of how democracy was eaten away, and then we saw what happened.
Right.
As a child, I grew up thinking, how could that happen? How could that happen? What was the matter? Why didn't people stand up? So here we are again, specifically to what you're doing. I have grave concerns that every time you go to court, the federal government under Trump is going to win over and over again, or when it gets to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court's going to side with him. And my concern is, even if we win, or you win in court, or other states win, he's not going to abide by it, and who can enforce those judgments?
Well, look, we've had that very conversation, right? And that's why, we need, particularly, and look, don't have to be a lot of them. Well, let's back up. As attorneys general, what are our options, right? We litigate or we do nothing. I think we all know, from my perspective at least, which one I would choose, right? If I do nothing, if we do nothing, then the OMB memo stands. Medicaid funding is frozen, at least for some period of time. Many other sources of funding are frozen. Americans are hurt. If we don't litigate over birthright citizenship, there are babies born in the United States that are not citizens. And that's just, we've talked about all the litigation that we're gender affirming care. We can keep going. All of the lawsuits that we've been a part of, I think, are critical to maintaining our democracy and pushing back against this pull of power beyond the individual issue. So we have to litigate. The question then becomes, it's the right question, and I've alluded to it at a minimum, our wins in court, and they're not beating us. That's not, so far, we're doing really well. I mean, if you total it up, we're winning these cases. And frankly, the judges are citing back to us what's in our paper, okay, our briefing. What the judges write, that's the greatest compliment you can have as a lawyer, is when the judge, in their decision, adopts the language and the reasoning that you gave the judge. That's the greatest compliment any lawyer will ever tell you, when a judge agrees with you, okay, in writing, in their writing, based on your written material. So we're winning. So I'm not worried about the Justice Department. Look, I've been in the Justice Department, I've been out of the Justice Department. I have a lot of respect for the Justice Department. I don't know how much respect I have for this one in terms of the quality of its lawyers, because I know this, lawyers are leaving, including from the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Rhode Island. There are great lawyers, already one has already left. I know there's another who's thinking about it because they want to come work for us. So this Justice Department is not going to be the one of Chris Hamlin or Peter Nerohna and any other Justice Department veterans in this room. It's going to be ideologues. And so I'm not worried about them having more talent. I'm not. So the question that you raised that I think is the one that causes me the most concern, and it's the what if, and we've talked about this as attorneys general. What if the administration doesn't comply with the court orders? And that's why we have been very strategic about how we have gone back to Judge McConnell. Because if we get to a point where he holds the administration in contempt, we want to make sure that when it goes up to the First Circuit and it goes up to the Supreme Court, we have the best chance of the court sustaining us because we took a deliberate process that was fair. Now, I'm very confident in the circuit, very confident in the First Circuit, and the other circuit courts, frankly. There's some more conservative than others. But the Supreme Court is a bit of a wild card. But what I thought Judge McConnell did in his decision, granting the relief we asked him for the TRO, was he cited Bruce Selya, always a great thing to do, but he cited Justice Kavanaugh, I believe. And so that was smart, right? He's citing back, anticipating someday somebody will read this. I imagine we're going to see other allusions to it in the preliminary injunction decision that we hope to get in the next few days. Citing back to these judges what they have said about, the quote from Kavanaugh is that the power of the purse lies in the Congress. That is what the OMB case is about. It's not very complicated. That's why, it's great because Musk is the greatest analogy for what the president's doing with his stupid chainsaw, right? Which is, this is not eliminating fraud, waste, and abuse with a scalpel. It's doing it with a chainsaw. And that's not how our system works. So I hear the echoes of the 30s, as you do, because sidelining the Reichstag, okay, and making the German judiciary meaningless was exactly what that authoritarian leader's plan was. And that's not the only time that's happened in the course of our history. Stalin, in 10 years, became a dictator simply by sidelining the people who could speak out against him and amassing power to himself. That's what authoritarians do. That's what this president, I believe, is doing through these cases. But I believe that our democracy is stronger than Donald Trump. And as long as there are people who are willing to fight him and people who are willing to support the fighters, that at the end of the day, reason will prevail. And I do think that Americans, as they begin to feel in their pocketbooks, as these terrorists bring home higher costs for people across this country, that there will be some buyer's remorse here. So that's why the president's party always does poorly in the midterms. I think there will be a price to pay from this insanity, and we'll see how it goes. But we're going to be fighting because that's what we do.
To God's ears.
Thanks, Deb.
Here, here. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you being here.
On behalf of the Jamestown Democratic Town Committee, thank you all for coming, and I'm sorry we didn't have a chair for everyone. Looks like the rec center might be the next venue, but
Yes.
we're going to work together to bring a lot more speakers in. We need to hear this information. We need the experts. We need to hear. We need to get the confidence that we're going to all be okay.
Yes.
As Peter mentioned, we have to push back. So, if you go visit our website, JamestownRIDemocrats.org, we've got actions on the website that you can take. We've got a couple pieces of paper with actions still on the table.
Yes.
You can watch this video. We're going to, thanks, Dad. We're going to have this posted tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
You can direct your friends and
Yep.
family to this website.
Yes.
People that don't have an attorney general like we
us.
do, that want to hear it for the inspiration. So please
So-
feel free to visit and stay tuned for our next.
We hope to see you at our next community conversation. As I said, this is going to be the first of many. Our goal is to build these relationships in the community, and we need you. Together, we can get this done. See you next time. Stay well.